Our attention on the show this evening is turned to asking questions about what the man Bola Tinubu has been able to accomplish in the past 1 year of his administration. One of his campaign promises is to drive Nigeria's energy transition in the transportation sector, leveraging compressed natural gas and enabling economic growth. We've seen the presidential CNG initiative roll out some pre-launch activities leading up to the highly anticipated nationwide deployment to be launched tomorrow. The presidential CNG initiative was launched in March last year by President Tinubu to promote the use of compressed natural gas as a cleaner and more affordable alternative to petrol and diesel. The key objectives here are sustainable energy solutions and reducing carbon emissions. The initiative, we understand, aims to convert 58,000 commercial vehicles to CNG in the first phase, with plans to expand to other states and private vehicles. The government also established a CNG conversion fund to support vehicle owners and also partnered with private companies to build CNG filling stations. Joining me live in the studio is the project director, chief executive of the PCNGI, Michael Oluwagbemi. Mr. Oluwagbemi, thank you for joining us on the program.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Long road to where we are right now, but many critics have questioned government's ability to be able to implement this initiative effectively. But you have embarked on a pre-launch itinerary. What's on ground now as we speak?
Thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers, and thanks for having me once again for us to explain what we're doing and how we're helping the president accomplish his mission and vision to transition in Nigeria's transport sector from dependence on oil to dependence on gas, which is much more safer, cheaper, and more reliable. Definitely what's on first last year when Mr. President laid out the vision and empaneled the steering committee of the presidential CNG initiative led by Dr. Zakade Deji and 6 other wise men and women. Nigeria at that time had barely 5,000 CNG vehicles running primarily in the city of Benin in Edo State, where there was a pilot sometime in 2017 by NNPC. At that time, we had about 12 dispensing stations, primarily also concentrated in the city of Benin. We had less than about 14, actually less than that. We counted about 7 to 10 conversion workshops in the country. We also had about 23 mother stations.
Were they operational?
They were operational, but supporting a very small CNG for mobility industry. Most of them were supporting CNG for power, which are taken off prior to this. But the president, upon empaneling us, asked us to, of course, to expand this nationwide, to begin to do this effectively everywhere. And since then, we've been able to, one, attract investment of over $50 million to bridge the gap, which we're talking about here, because there's a huge gap between the need and what is available when it comes to the infrastructure and the distribution of CNG. Since then, as of today, we have well over, from less than 12 refueling stations, there are at least about 30 of them ongoing, and another maybe 30 under construction that should be ready by July 31st. So we'll take it to about 60 very quickly. Conversion workshops in the country, we've enumerated over 141 as of today, and we continue to add to those from less than, as I indicated, less than 14 of them in last year.
This 30 you talked about, is it across the geopolitical zones?
Yeah, they are spread.
Is it evenly distributed?
Well, it's not necessarily evenly. CNG gas is not evenly distributed today in Nigeria. It's primarily in the south of the country. We have 23 states of the federation within what we call the CNG range states today, because there's a limitation to how far you can transport CNG in bottles and cascades away from the last or the most northernmost point of compression, which today is about in a Jaukuta or Bajana area. So the limit of CNG distribution beyond that point is around Kaduna, Niger states today. And of course, but some projects that the government is doing through NNPC, like the AKK project, once completed, and a few mini LNG projects that we're looking at in Ajaukuta, should begin to expand that in the next 6 to 9 months.
But are you saying that we now have 141 conversion workshops?
Yeah.
Well, I thought the idea was to deliver 100 by the end of this year.
Yeah, so we've surpassed it, isn't it?
Oh, so you surpassed that.
Yep.
But we are still trailing the 16 refueling sites.
Yeah, and we'll continue to do more. With refueling stations, of course, it's not government that is building them. They are being invested in. So most of that $50 million have gone into building refueling stations. Some of their equipment are already on ground. A company like NIPCO is building 32 simultaneously. 10 is being commissioned between last week and next week. 6 is being commissioned of that in Lagos, 4 in Abuja and Nasarawa. A company like Bovas is doing 8, 4 in Ibadan, 2 in Kwara, 2 in Abuja here. And they plan to do another additional 10 in between Ekiti, Nasarawa, Lagos, as well as Oyo states, and also FCT. Company like MRS is already looking at a few in between Kaduna and Lagos. So again, in between all of that, you also have active players like Accela and a few other companies that are looking at the southeast as well as the south.
This partnership with the private sector.
Yep.
Are you saying that all of the conversion workshops and refueling stations, all these infrastructures are owned by private individuals?
They are owned by private individuals.
Government owns nothing.
Our intention is not to replace business. Business is better to do the work of business. Our work is to serve as catalyst. And how are we doing that? If you ask me, we're doing that, of course, number one, in promoting the technology. The government has provided very strong indications that it's going in the way of CNG. Mr. President have said MDAs are not going to be buying anything but CNG-enabled vehicles. We provided tax waiver as well as import duty exemptions to the sector. We're enabling permitting. We are fast-tracking permitting of expansion of refueling facilities across the country, as well as accreditation of conversion workshops.
You know, there are, however, credible concerns about how do you ensure that the private sector comply with safety and environmental standards in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, you do that by having, number one, very clear standards. We did that earlier on in November when we worked with the Standard Organization of Nigeria to develop the 80 standards. And since then, that's just the first phase of the work. The second phase of that work is now activating the operational guidelines of the various regulatory agencies, but also making sure that this regulation is clear, is predictable, and is easy to comply with by having a one-stop shop compliance mechanism. And that's what we're calling the Nigerian Gas Vehicle Monitoring System. We're having a workshop next week with the 5 principal regulators, NMPDRA, SON, the FRSC, MBTE, as well as the National Automotive Development and Design Council, that will be focusing on co-creating this one-stop shop. So again, a lot of behind-the-scene hard work, grunt work, very small team, but we are very focused. And with the assistance and vision of Mr. President and support of the steering committee, we are achieving our goals. As you see already, even our very small goal of 100 conversion centers, we're already beating it already by just midway into the program.
In the past year, we've had terrible experiences with LPG. That's cooking gas, right?
Yes, very different.
And then, you know, there are a lot of talk about safety of CNG vehicles and even the filling stations vis-a-vis building public confidence in what you are doing. Practically, what measures are you taking to address these concerns?
Yeah, so first it's awareness. I mean, people have to understand that CNG is not LPG. CNG is natural gas, occurs naturally. It's primarily methane and ethane. LPG is a product of crude oil refining or processing of natural gas and, you know, stripping it. And it's primarily propane and butane. And so it's heavier, cost almost about the same as petrol anyway. So it does not make sense for us to use it for transportation.
Well, because it's not less combustible, because that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
the fact that
methane
is highly inflammable.
Actually, the self-ignition point for natural gas is much more higher than that of LPG. So it's much more safer. It's also 18% less explosive than petrol and 8% less, 8 times, not 18%, 18 times less explosive than petrol and 8 times less explosive than diesel. Okay. So this is the science behind it. I mean, because it occurs naturally, it's lighter than air. It dissipates very quickly. It's not contained. So you're much less likely to get in an explosive vehicle situation in an accident. It's embottled in a non-extruded cylinder that doesn't have any welding, unlike LPG, where you see the welds and so it can escape. And it's also, these cylinders are bulletproof. So these are things that make CNG much more suitable for automobile and automotive.
All the cylinders are bulletproof. Are you talking about the ones produced here? Is there a specification to that regard?
Yeah, there's a specification where we don't produce anything right now in the country. We're having to depend on the imports, but we're also changing that. We're already working on an industrialization and manufacturing program to underpin this. Beyond phase one, or what I even call phase 0, which is what we're doing now, which is simply to introduce the technology and expand, make sure we cover all the CNG range states, the 23 CNG range states. By the time we go to the next phase, we'll actually make sure that most of the parts and the cylinders and the kits that we need for this program are produced in Nigeria, creating Nigerian jobs. We don't want to go from importing petrol to importing conversion kits.
So as we speak now, the commercial vehicles, the tricycles, the buses we're expecting are not manufactured here.
Some are manufactured here. Some of the vehicles are assembled here by a local manufacturer. We visited a couple of factories in the last 2 weeks, and the media has been with us, from Meccano to Jets to the guys in Enugu that manufacture there, the Kujo Motors. On Thursday, we are actually going to be joining the manufacturers of the CNG tricycles, Luoja, working with the local company TGIS. We'll be with them on Thursday to launch that factory on Lagos-Ibadan Expressway.
There's some
manufacturing already.
Yes. The figure we had from the federal government was to launch about 2,700 of these buses and tricycles before May 29.
Yeah.
How many of those are in?
Already we have almost all of them in. What we are now doing is, of course, there's a process of receiving them. Some have already been received. We'll be launching a few. You'll see them in Kwara State, Ilorin tomorrow. Those are already in hand.
Okay.
But because it's local assembly, local manufacturing, as you're putting them together, piecing them together, you literally have to test them. We don't want to receive them until after they are properly tested and received, but they're here. They've landed it. You'll be visiting the factory on Thursday for the tricycle factory. For the vehicle factory, we've been visiting those, and we've been seeing their automotive on their assembly. So they're ready to go. Again, the emphasis of this program is not those assets. The emphasis of this program is on conversion. How do we get the millions of commercial vehicle owners who already have petrol vehicles to start using gas and moving them away from our addiction to dirty oil? And to us, to do that is just an intervention of less than $500, which is a conversion kit and the cylinders, and the vehicles are ready to go. Those vehicles last longer as a result.
What's that figure in Naira?
In Naira, that's about 750,000 Naira.
For conversion, right?
Yes, less than that. Again, it depends on the valve of your vehicle or size of your vehicle. But that's about the max you will be going to these days when you're talking about an 8-valve engine. So with that much amount, we can move millions of vehicles in Nigeria that are currently available already. We don't have to go and buy a new vehicle that's costing 80, 90 million Naira. How many 750,000 Naira can you get out of an 80 million Naira bus, right? I mean, you're getting about 100 vehicles. So we are going to be launching the mass conversion program very quickly here. Already tomorrow, we're going to announce a list of centers where our partners at NURTW, RTN, as well as NATO can send their members.
Are there certified workshops? Because what I foresee is a situation where any mechanic would just say, "Bring your car, I can convert it for you." How do you ensure that that proliferation doesn't exist such that it begins to tamper with the standard?
Yes, so the Nigerian Automotive Design and Development Council is responsible for the accreditation of workshops, as well as ensuring that they have qualified technicians to work on these vehicles. Because essentially by doing conversion, you're tampering with the OEM specification of those vehicles. But the NADDC is the one empowered in Nigeria to certify those modifications, and they are doing that. They hosted a workshop 2 weeks ago for conversion workshop owners, and that went very well in terms of input. Their system of accreditation is going to be launched anytime soon, but we're already working with them in identifying these already to be grandfathered conversion workshops that we're going to publish a list of tomorrow as centers where our affiliates, partners at NURTW, RTN and NATO can begin to take their vehicles for conversion upon identifying the members that are immediately qualified.
You have talked about how CNG is safer than petrol and diesel, and government has also emphasized that this initiative will ease the burden of increased pump price in petrol. But how much does CNG cost today per kg?
It costs about 200 to 230 Naira.
All right, so that's the thing. How do you respond to those who have asked why CNG sells that high? The fact that we've been flaring gas since 1947. Some will say, why should we be selling it at that rate? I think it was the chairman of Zip Tech company who mentioned that it should be sold at about 50 Naira per kg.
Well, I'm not in the business of pricing petroleum products. That is the responsibility of the Nigerian Midstream Downstream Regulatory Authority, NMPDRA.
But you know what I'm driving at is that for this to fly, it has to come across as more affordable.
Yes, a lot more. It's a lot more affordable. So today you're going to be saving about 70% relative to petrol, and about 90% relative to diesel.
You're not adding the cost of conversion, which is
even if with the cost of conversion, you break even in less than 20 weeks. So after 20 weeks, you have your car for the next 6-7 years.
You'll be saving 70% on petrol.
Yes, so because let's remember that NMPDRA came out with a concessionary pricing for the sector in April that gave further discounts to where it used to be. It used to be $2.43, I think, in terms of its inlet pricing for gas to the sector. And that was reduced to about $1.49 or equivalent. I mean, and you can imagine what that represents, a 40% discount further. So that means that the sector is enjoying concessionary pricing relative to power, relative to industries, and relative to other uses of gas in Nigeria today. And that's good for Nigeria. Like
and there is no form of subsidy on it.
No, there's no subsidy. But again, the concept of subsidy is not in place in the area of gas. I mean, gas is a regulated product. You price gas. I mean, there's already different type of pricing for gas domestically in Nigeria, based on what we call the gas-based industry requirements and all of that stuff. So NMPDRA have a scientific method that they go through when they're trying to determine what kind of pricing they should give which sector, and they've determined that the CNG for mobility sector deserves a reduced pricing. Number one, to encourage adoption, and of course Nigeria, by and large, I think for us as a country, is how do we begin to use our God-given resources, which is gas. We are a gas province that happen to have some oil. How do we begin to use those resources to power economy, to drive our economy, to make life better for the common man, to reduce inflation? These are things that are very critical. And that's why the conversion program we're announcing tomorrow is going to focus initially not on the general public like you and I. We can survive. We have jobs. Of course, it's tough for us, but it doesn't mean that we cannot figure a way to survive. But 90% of the population are moved by 10% of vehicles which are on, the mass transit. So those are the guys that we're first intervening with. We can move significant number of commercial vehicles, the Sienna, the Sharon, the buses, the coastal buses that ply our cities and in and out, the downfalls, work with our metro authorities to move these vehicles to CNG. It will represent significant cost reduction.
So the expectation is that this will, drive down the amount of money people pay as transport fare.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's look at the timeline for delivery vis-a-vis some of the promises we've had. Federal government had earmarked 100 billion naira out of the 500 billion palliative budget to purchase 5,500 CNG vehicles. Amongst, I think there's 100 electric buses here.
Yes.
Precisely, what's the timeline for delivery? This is May 29.
Yeah.
There was also the goal of converting about 58,000 commercial vehicles in the first phase. Walk us through the timeline so that Nigerians can...
So the timeline, I said, tomorrow we kick off the conversion program. We'll be in Ilorin to kick off one of the conversion centers that is being set up by one of the core partners. They are setting up not just the conversion center in Ilorin, but also a refueling station. And the governor of Kwara State, who is also the chairman of the Governors Forum, in demonstration of the cooperation between state and federal government, will be symbolically kicking off that program for us in Ilorin tomorrow. That program immediately allows us to begin doing part of that 58,000 you mentioned under this program. Right. It also, of course, allows us to begin to demonstrate the refueling capacity. So we are using this first phase beyond this 58,000 conversion and the 5,500 vehicles. We are also enabling 10 refueling centers across Nigeria, 16 virtual pipeline systems to be able to extend the reach of CNG from the current state to additional 10 states in Nigeria. And those 10 states are coming live, starting with the first one tomorrow. Kwara State didn't have a refueling capacity up until tomorrow. It's going to get one from tomorrow. The same thing is true about Nasarawa State. They didn't have one. They're going to get one in the next couple of weeks. We're expecting their own units to arrive in Nigeria in about mid-June. Ekiti State didn't have one. They're going to get one in about 3 weeks when their unit arrives and it's going to be installed. So we're extending the range of CNG. We are getting the conversion program started tomorrow. Now, with respect to the vehicles, tricycles are already arriving. Like I said, tomorrow you will see one of the model tricycles in Ilorin. We're going to the center on Thursday where it has been assembled already. They have their supplies already of about 2,500 to begin with. In about 30 to 45 days, you see a tricycle right next to you.
We have to get
one of those range states.
But it could have been as easy as the way you make it sound. In 30 seconds, what do you consider the biggest challenges, in driving this project, and how is the government navigating them?
The biggest challenge is our belief and our confidence that we can do big things as a country. I think many times we Nigerians forget that we're a big country. There are very few countries in the world that have 200 plus million people. And big countries have big problems. And then the big countries must have big-hearted people to be able to confront those big challenges. I keep telling Nigerians that our country was one of the only 2 countries in the world to build a new capital and populate it in the last 50 years. We built Abuja. If our parents can build Abuja, we can definitely deploy CNG across Nigeria. That's my belief.
Well, we're counting on those words, and then perhaps we'll return in another 1 year to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Michael Oluwagbemi is the Project Director, Chief Executive of the Presidential CNG.